Welcome.
You have arrived at your destination.
I'm Emily Lutzker.
And I'm Anna Kamasia. Today, International Arrival speaks with the artistic duo AYDO, Ayoung and Nicholas O. Through performance-based film and site-specific installation, AYDO reimagines Korean folklore and pre-colonial spiritual practices to reflect personal and Asian American perspectives. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here today for the podcast.
Thank you so much for having us.
Hello.
Great to have you. And there's two of you. So maybe we'll start by having you introduce yourselves and your individual practices before we talk about your collaborative work.
Sure. I'm Ayoung. I primarily have a background in film performance and site-specific installation, thinking a lot about pre-colonial spiritual practices. That's been my long-term research, inquiry, and interest in my practice.
My name's Nick. I started with ceramics. I've been doing ceramics for a long time, like 15 years or so. And I think since grad school, I've merged into other materials, like performance, installation, sculpture, and especially when we started working together, we started doing more of sculpture and installation. And I would say 70% of work is now video.
70%? Oh, wow. And a word on the street is that you used to be a hip-hop artist.
Oh, we're going deep into the lore, into the archives.
Yes, I used to breakdance. I started in high school. I think I danced for about 13 years just to compete competitively, mostly in the Bay Area. So that is my path, part of my path.
And we bring forward into our choreography.
Yeah. Not too
You
much.
actually?
Yeah.
I do, yeah. He's so comfortable, I think, being sort of with these embodied experiences. So he's much more comfortable performing live or in front of a camera than I am.
Which is interesting because aren't you usually the subject of most of the videos?
Why I lean so much into film. I'm deeply shy, which is also why in live performance, we always joke that I'm a tree. So I'm as covered as possible inside of a cocoon, inside of some kind of vessel where no one can see me. Also, I think it works with the work, but also somewhat selfishly. It's why I work so much with dancers and performers. Even before I'd met Nick, I had worked with choreographers and dancers for quite a while because it also just takes the pressure off of me.
I want to go back to this breakdancing thing for a minute. That was something I knew about. So why did you stop and how did you get into it? What's the story behind that?
Story behind it. So I think this goes back, it just kind of goes into my whole philosophy around art and community. But when I started dancing, I was in high school and I had just moved to Oregon from Korea when I was 15. And dancing was a way to communicate with people without actually speaking the language, English. I love dancing. I love the whole culture of hip hop. And that's something that we didn't really have in Korea. But eventually, what was interesting is that Korea became the best breakdancers of the world. Oh,
Yeah.
so there was this whole phenomenon. Oh, you're Korean, you must be good at breakdancing. That kind of stereotype too. Right. But yeah, so I continued and eventually moved to San Francisco. And I think I just kind of aged out. You look at it, you look like
It's physically demanding, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I couldn't practice as much. I used to dance sometimes 8 hours a day. And then I obviously shifted towards ceramics and art and having a job.
Yeah.
But to be able to
And do you dance at all, even not hip hop?
just like exercise, different types of exercising, like biking, climbing, snowboarding. I try to do like handstands once in a while. Oh, my joints.
At ceramics, it's also
Ceramics is also very demanding. It's the same. Like you practice over and over and you like try to perfect certain moves and then you try to repeat it. And it's also performative because you're also like nowadays it's all about putting videos on Instagram and I teach as well. So it's all like in front of the students, I can't mess up. I have to look cool. And it's like certain gestures you have to think about, like the angle that people look at you.
And you make everything, I've seen some of your videos and you make everything look so easy with ceramics. You're just like, whoa,
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. It's
You're like, wow.
it's all practice. It's all like some of the moves are like not necessary, but you have to do it to like impress people.
Just thinking about ceramics and these giant ceramics that you made for your last show that Emily and I were both lucky enough to come and see at the Shed, the
Yes.
Hall Portals, these life-size ceramics of zodiac figures, and they were so impressive. They were beautiful. I thought they were just stunning. So I wondered if you could, for our listeners, maybe just describe them a little bit more, the work that went into them, but also how you situate them in relation to the film and to the project.
Yeah. When we were conceiving of the project, the videos actually came first. We were thinking about ways of approaching the Korean DMZ, which we have a long-term kind of engagement with. We've been there now, I think, for 5 years. We'll go on and off and travel and film at the DMZ. And so we wanted to think about borderlands through an ecological and geopolitical lens. And so then for this project, we wanted to think about the Korean DMZ in relation to the US-Mexico borderland. And when we were thinking about the sculptural aspect, because we did know that we wanted to have a sculptural aspect, we started to look at sort of archaeological sites, pre-colonial relics. That's where a lot of our research comes from in terms of ceramics. And we found these chimeric zodiac statues that appear in a lot of these tombs. And they're the same where it'll be an animal head and a human form. And they encircle a lot of these tombs, and they're considered these ancestral guardians, as well as emissaries between the spiritual and material worlds, traversing both worlds. And so we liked the idea of creating a similar structure where we would put the video in the center and then encircle the video with these sculptures as a form of ancestral protection. Because we are also looking at the sites from an ecological lens, all of the sculptures are engraved with different aspects of the landscape ecologies. So there's a lot of allusions to cacti, water, native trees. And so each of the figures also has an elemental aspect.
Yeah. So just for our listeners who aren't actually seeing the figures, if I remember correctly, there's 12 of them. And they were arranged in a circle, I'll say like a large circle, like about 20 feet, 25 feet in diameter. And they're each kind of about like human height almost. They were arranged each at where the hands of a clock might be at the edges of the circle. And each of the figurines were there. And each one was half animal, half human, and represented the different years in the Chinese zodiac. So that sort of idea of making them this scale and then having a film to go with it, is that something that you were thinking about specifically that would add to the work, and in what way?
Yeah, I think when we were conceiving of the work, we wanted there to be a ceramic component because we have almost always only shown video primarily, except for a few kind of smaller venues. And so we really wanted this opportunity to also incorporate a ceramic aspect.
So I think we're also working around the theme of portals. So these animals are guarding the sanctuaries, which are in the videos, so that these are portals, so that we're kind of using the video as a portal to these landscapes that people don't really have access to. And the guardians are supposed to be guarding these sanctuaries. There's 12 animals, but 5 different elements. And this used to be a way of telling the time period back in the Joseon Dynasty, or even before that. It comes from Buddhism. And so the 5 elements are
water, earth, metal, fire, and wood. Yeah.
Yeah. So they'll go through the sequence and match it with the animal. So for instance, if you're born, let's say, I'm not sure the exact time. We did this research, but now that it's been a while, I don't quite remember. But let's say if you're born like 1965, you could be born like pig but it's like a wood pig.
For example, I'm born in 1990 and
Yeah.
we are a metal horse.
Mhm.
Similarly,
Yeah.
you are a
My wood ox.
wood ox.
Yeah. So that was a way to tell what year you're born using the actual numbers. And every 60 years, it will repeat itself. So that's why in Korea, especially if you turn 60, it's a big event because you get to see the same year that you were born, the exact same year that you're born one more time. So and then not a lot of people lived to 60 back then either. It was like a two-sided thing. And usually at these tombs and these sanctuaries, the guardians usually they place the horse towards north. So from the horse, they'll encircle all the way. And the pattern usually starts, January is usually rat, and then it will go rat, pig, dog, rooster, monkey, goat, horse, snake, dragon, rabbit, tiger, and ox. And this is actually, and then that actually goes by like January, February, March, and in that sequence as well. But then it starts with a horse, and then it goes back into rat, and then it circles back. So there's a sequence. So we were trying to recreate that circle as well in that. So we had the horse facing north, and then from there we just went into a circle. And I don't think we explained that within the text itself, but that was also part of the work that was really important.
Yeah, that's why we were very involved in the install process because we were like, oh, they can't just be like randomly placed in the circle. There's a spiritual meaning also to the way that it's kind of placed.
And they always face outwards.
Yeah.
So that's another thing too, not inwards. There are places where they face inwards, and that's usually at like Buddhist temples, where they face towards the Buddhist statue. That's because they're protecting the Buddhist statue. When you're at a tomb or when you're at outside the temple, they always circle outwards, so that I guess the evil spirits can't get into to these places.
And so in your version, though, the central figure is the video itself.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that video and just you talk about it as a portal to this other space, to this other geography. The DMZ is a space already that is this liminal space between places, and lots of places have them. And it can kind of serve as a metaphor for boundaries or borders or no place almost. And so I wondered why specifically you chose to film there. And what are the metaphoric associations for you and maybe connections to who you are also?
Yeah, I think so. Our relationship with the DMZ started actually quite serendipitously. We went to Korea, this was right before COVID, with this sort of general idea that we would film in the mountains because that's where a lot of these ancestral rituals that we're interested in are performed. And then we had gotten in touch with a director of photography, cinematographer, because the one that we primarily work with in the US was not available. And the more I explained the project, he was, you should film at the DMZ because it's an ecological sanctuary. If you were thinking about remote mountainous regions where you will not be disturbed, that is the place to be. And so he really sold the DMZ as this from an ecological sort of standpoint, which felt really wild to me because, of course, growing up in the States, I have this idea of what the space is, which is also like somewhat sensationalized, of course, by the media as this very scary, war-torn space. And there is that aspect. It is heavily surveilled and there is an over-presence of military there. But there is also what we were quite surprised to find, in addition to it being in this beautiful ecological sanctuary, is that there is also a thriving community there. And there's generations of people who are very much interested in stewarding the land, protecting the land. They each have very interesting sort of stories of how they kind of came back to that space. We have a relationship with this artist who we've worked with now for a number of years, who he grew up, born and was raised there, and then went to Seoul University, which is kind of like their version of Harvard. And like the whole village threw like a giant parade on his behalf. But then he was like, I'm going to come back home. And then he made his entire practice about the DMZ. And so we were quite taken with that sort of dichotomy of the DMZ. And then as the years passed, we just found ourselves being drawn back to that space when we were filming a lot of these rituals that have to do with ancestral trauma and healing. On a personal note, of course, being that we are Korean, I think everyone has a relationship to the border, just in the sense that it was already a small country and then it was ripped in half in recent history. For me personally, my entire paternal lineage is actually in North Korea. My grandfather just found his way in the South and then just lost his entire family. So my dad always says his dream is before he dies, he wants to visit North Korea. And we are all like, that's a horrible idea, but we love that spiritually. Yeah, so I think that's why we were personally drawn and creatively drawn to this space. For this iteration, we did want to take a more research-based approach. And so we were very excited to partner with the DMZ Ecology Research Institute. And so they're a group of environmentalists and some scientists as well, and they convene and do these kind of ecological excursions. And particularly, they're very focused on the red-naped and white-naped cranes that fly in from Siberia and find like a nesting area in the DMZ. And so we had the opportunity to film with them. So we made it past military checkpoints, which is very scary. We had to give them our passports, and we were told, show up the day of. We cannot guarantee that you will be able to get in because the military has its own, depends on what mood they're in. We don't know. Luckily, we were able to go in. Even the way we filmed, it was allowed, but the loophole is that you can't film, but you can film with your phone. But Nick had the new iPhone, which can shoot in 4K. So that's how we were able to work around that. And then to the point where the resolution was high enough that we could project it.
And so just remind me, I feel like it was on water. Is that correct?
We're in a car, but we are driving around the Imjin River quite a bit, which was also quite, I told my aunt about it and she cussed me out because she was like, are you insane? You're going to get kidnapped. Because it's nicknamed the River of Death. It was a very key part of the war. And also I think for her, because she's from my paternal side and my entire paternal lineage, they lived along the banks of the Imjin River. So they have a lot of different memories.
Absolutely.
Of that space. Yeah. And then, I think we were just thinking more largely about the idea of ecology and borderlands and surveillance. And so naturally as we are also living here, we're thinking a lot about the US-Mexico borderland and the devastations and atrocities that are currently happening on the border. For that, we didn't go and document on site. We looked at a lot of archival footage. I found these really, in some ways, disturbing archives. It was like you can just find it on government websites. And they're drone shots of the US-Mexico landscape. And they make it look really sterile, but also eerily beautiful. And so I pulled from that source for that video.
Okay. Wow. That must have been a really incredible experience for you both to be there.
Yeah, it was freezing. It's always a test of endurance. I don't know why we don't go probably because it's off season. It's always so incredible, I think, speaking to people who live there in particular.
Particularly who have longer historical memory too, of, like you said, talking about it as the River of Death, and then to think about it now as this new space that's this ecological safe space.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your relationship with Korea and your diasporic experience, because I know, Nick, you were born in America and then you went back to Korea, and Ayoung, you were born in Korea and came to America. So I think that's like an interesting, there must be parallels, but there also must be so many things that are so different for each of you. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the nuances that presents for you both in terms of your understanding of America and Korea and diasporic communities too, in both those places.
Yeah. So,
if you could chat a little bit about that.
So I was born actually in Wisconsin, out of all places. And then I moved to Korea when I was 7. And it's For me, it was like an interesting experience because when I went to Korea, I didn't speak any Korean. When I had to learn how to speak Korean while I was there. And by the time I was like 9, I think I didn't speak any English. When you're young, you're able to really adapt really fast. When I was living my life, because then I had to come back to America when I was 15 and try to learn English. I think I did pretty well in terms of learning English through breakdancing and all that. It really helped. I was very culturally Korean when I moved back to the States. And Ayoung, obviously, she grew up in Jersey, so she was very American already. And when we started working together, or Ayoung had all these fascinations towards Korean cultures that I would definitely overlook and I would not be interested in because sometimes it's taboo in culture to talk about, or sometimes it's like, this is something sacred that we wouldn't necessarily use it in artwork. Or for instance, shamanism isn't that popular of a religion or a practice in Korea. And a lot of times it's looked down upon. But in America, especially during COVID, there was all this fascination towards shamanism. And everybody was looking for a shaman to find the ways of being life and things like that and trying to decipher their dreams. Or so when we started working together, that was around the time it was during COVID. And we were talking about shamanism. It was like, oh, yeah, that's something we don't want to touch. That's no. You don't want to work with a shaman. I think when I was in Korea, I grew up being scared of shamans because they had these, supernatural powers that could kill you or give you like bad dream.
And they're really
like bad fortune.
in like film and
a lot of times it is. So, but then we started working together and we did more research. And actually, it was interesting because I actually learned more about Korean culture and shamanism during that time than any time else. Because a lot of times we kind of like gloss over it and don't really talk about like the effects of certain things that I am was interested in the history and the context of Korea. When we were researching, we read this entire manuscript about the Korean history that was actually written by a monk like 300 years after this dynasty had been gone. We were reading through this text and it was really interesting because I actually grew up in this town that was this whole manuscript was based on. And then we're looking back and, oh yeah, I do remember this temple and these steps they're talking about, or like these like tombstones and things that reference within the book. So for instance, like they were talking about this famous queen. I don't like it when I retell this story, but there was this,
so gross.
We want to hear the gross story. Yes, we want to hear the gross story. Yeah.
There was a story about these, it's not that bad. There was a story of these two sisters, and one of them had this dream where she went up to the highest like hill in the city and she pees. And
all over the city.
All over the city. And it floods the city.
Right.
Yeah. So then her sister was like, oh, that's a good dream. Let me buy it from you. So she buys it with some silk. And later on, the sister who bought the dream becomes a really famous queen. So that's people actually like really believe in that, and that person really existed in the world. And there's also like Korean dramas about her. That's when people really know it's when they make a Korean drama about it. And when I was growing up, I would hear what she's done, but we actually never heard about the story of how she became queen, or like the stories like back in the days of like buying this dream from her sister or anything like that. Looking at this manuscript and looking at it from a very different perspective, and folklores and shamanism, and this dynasty was when Korea was going from shamanism to Buddhism. So there's a lot of influence of like Buddhist temples taking over the shamanist temples. And there was also this really famous astrology tower that still exists. They still have the actual tower there. I'm pretty sure they rebuilt it, but it's something that everybody goes and looks at. But within the manuscript, they also talk about, oh yeah, and then they went up to this tower and they looked at the stars and they were telling the king, oh, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And they actually go and did it. And these shamans had a lot of power back then. And then they shift into Buddhism, and then the monks have more power. So this whole history that was almost forgotten, we were able to research it through just learning about shamanism that I had no idea.
What time period are you talking about here?
Yeah.
Oh, so this is like 200 AD to, was this 300?
Okay.
Yeah. So,
okay. And the manuscript that you were accessing was written around that time as well?
It was written 200 or 300 years after.
Yeah.
So they call this the Three Kingdom era, and then one dynasty was able to conquer all of them, and then that later on becomes the Joseon dynasty in 1300 BC. So within that time, they ran this, and then I think it was like widely produced, also, and there's also different versions of it. But we're reading one that was like particular from this monk, and which also influenced a lot of our work. And would since then we've also read other manuscripts and other writings, and there's also comic books about these, which is funny. So we're just collecting different data, but through working together and very similar, but also very different perspectives on Korean culture. And even when we're in Korea, the way we talk about, for instance, when we want to work around a tomb and rituals around the dead, I will be like careful about it. And I'd be like, oh, you have to be very respectful of these tombs. Meanwhile, Ayoung's like, no, but it's so beautiful around here. Let's
That's I wasn't disrespectful.
She wasn't disrespectful,
I
but
was just very in wonder.
it's just a very different perspective, and that's like how we work around these things and looking at it from different perspectives. And especially when the DMZ, obviously I was taught to never go in there or never be around the area. And when we started working together, we would actually have, because we need a car and all that, we'd actually have my parents drive us there. And they were also learning. We were all learning together, even though they've been to North Korea. They've obviously lived in Korea their whole lives. We were all driving around and reading more about these areas. And there's certain areas that we can't go. And we're trying to figure out why we can't go.
So, I have a question about this history, though. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, yeah.
Is it that these stories and these folklores have been erased through colonial contact? Or is it that they're just absorbed and people don't remember them or talk about them? I just feel like, what is it that drove you both to want to go back to this pre-colonial folklore, spiritual practices specifically?
It's a mix. I think that because of a lot of the historical material was eroded somewhat intentionally during the Japanese occupation of Korea. That's where we lost kind of like a lot of our culture. And then subsequently the war, Western interventions. And so a lot of the historical material has been erased or just intentionally buried. And so that is an interest of ours. A lot of the reasons why we are so drawn to archaeological relics, for example, when we're thinking about ceramics, is to think about what it means to reclaim these objects that also have found its way to Western institutions. For example, I know Nick has a longstanding interest in the Korean moon jar, which is this iconic pottery form. But the story behind that, which I'm sure you can speak about more thoroughly, is that they were produced during the kind of last pre-colonial era, pre-modern Korea, the Joseon dynasty. And then there's only, 30, 40 of them left in the world that have survived. And most of them are in the West, and a lot of them are in the US. And the most famous one being at the British Museum, which is not surprising.
Yeah.
And so then what it means to reclaim these objects and reclaim these histories, cultural practices has become a big part of our practice. And then when it comes to sites that have a lot to do with historical trauma, I think that's why we gravitate towards the DMZ as well. And yeah, where Nick has grown up has become also a weird research center. It's nicknamed, we love to say it, 1,000-year-old city. It's the ancient capital of Korea. Yeah, I would say that for me, it was a huge deal to go there. I always saw it in family albums because it's a common thing for middle school, high school students in Korea, in Seoul, to visit as like a field trip to Gyeongju to learn about our history. And I would always see them in my mom and dad's family albums. And so I have a more kind of traditional diasporic route where I came here when I was 4 and barely speak Korean and just grew up in this suburban Americana environment, and then had this kind of yearning and longing about my culture later on. I think when I was younger, there was especially early 2000s, there was an attempt to be as American as possible and to assimilate as much as possible. And then it flipped in college. And so every time I would go, I would be really excited. And I'd be like, oh my God, look, we're just walking along the road and there's this archaeological tomb. Like, and next, yeah, like
It's like here all the time.
it's really not that interesting. There's been a lot of humorous moments, I think, in our collaboration, especially when we're in Korea.
So how did you two meet and start collaborating?
I think we
We-
met, right before COVID.
Yeah, we met through a very close friend and wonderful artist. His name is Jeffrey Maris. I went to grad school with Jeffrey. I think you met him through Pioneer Works.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we met at a drunken art party in New York City. We ended up quarantining together.
Yes, this is really
Yeah.
And now you are married, right?
Yes, we are.
So you're not just work partners,
Yes. Life partners.
Yeah.
life partners. Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, so I do want to make a correction on the time period of the dynasty. It's called Shilla Dynasty, and it's from 57 BC to 935 CE. Yeah, so that's why they call it 1,000-year city, because it lasted for about 1,000 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You two are permanently settled in New York, but yet with the one foot in your Korean culture and the other foot, or 2 feet in the Korean culture, one from each of you and 1 foot from each of you in the American culture. Do you feel more American or more Korean?
I definitely spent my entire adult and childhood here. So I definitely feel a little bit fish out of water when I'm in Korea. I literally need Nick to be my unofficial translator. I always thought my Korean was great. And then it's not great. It's what I've come
She's
to.
got a lot better. She's been watching a lot of Korean drama. So
Yeah, it's improving, but I had a lot of false confidence. I would say that I am more familiar with my life in the US. I have my whole family is here too. Yeah,
yeah.
I guess
I
you.
I would say I'm like just Korean American, and obviously I moved here in the early 2000s, and it was a very different time. 9/11 happened when I was in high school. There was a lot of, I guess, divide in the country, and there was a lot of racism towards like people who didn't look white. And I think part of that wanted me to learn more about the culture and also embrace my culture at the same time. So I would say I've always been like 50-50 ever since obviously I was born here as well. And that's why, and even in our artwork, we're very interested in politics of America as well as like politics in Korea. Even though we can't
don't
like,
vote there.
yeah, we don't specifically, we can't like represent or talk about Korean politics as well as a Korean person would.
But I do think that your work definitely has that. It definitely stands as a metaphor for other displaced or other border bound, other like 2 places, liminality. I think that you get that even though you don't specifically address America.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, New Jersey could be this other space as well.
Yeah, we are the state
Yes.
of gardens.
Yeah.
Exactly. I spent my adolescence in New Jersey, so we could talk about that quite a lot. It's the portal to New York, but
Yeah.
from the rest of America. And I was thinking as you mentioned it that you were such a figure in so many of the videos. This sort of almost like a mythological, like a beautiful, romantic Korean. Are we going to see the New Jersey girl and you come out and some of them sometime soon?
That's behind the scene.
Yeah, a lot of sass. Girls don't pump our own gas.
Yeah.
That was like the bumper sticker we all had in high school. Jersey girls don't pump our own gas.
That needs to maybe make an appearance just in your video at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. The credits will.
Yeah, exactly. Jersey girls don't pump their own gas. I love it.
But I do agree that we have a lot of underlining political components to our work, and that we would sometimes try to kind of cover that through being overly beautiful or showing a beautiful landscape and the nature, rather than showing more of the political components like building that's bombed or like barbed wires or military people marching. Even though we see that a lot, that underlying tone is already there when we're already working in these spaces, so that we try to over exaggerate to the other sides. We think that's really important in our work that we don't necessarily talk about, but it's very much there.
And your videos are very sumptuous.
Yeah.
They're very beautiful to watch, and you kind of get drawn into them, as you say. So you perhaps don't realize at first, but you're just like, oh, this is this beautiful space and these beautiful movements in the water. And yeah, we have talked outside of this about your cinematographer as well, doing a beautiful job with your videos.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, he's incredible. He's definitely more kind of very much embedded in the film industry, but he always jokes, oh, the dirty little secret in film is location. And so he's very much great at finding the perfect spot to film at. It's a bit of a nightmare, but every time we film outdoors, which is all the time, we have to film right before sunrise or right before sunset, which is actually not that bad because those are the golden hours. And then he considers the rest of the day to be like unusable, ugly light. Yeah.
Ugly light.
Yeah. So we've definitely become this trio in a way.
Well, and there's another in-between zone for you is the magic hour before sunset or before sunrise. Like your DMZ, your
New Jersey.
Americanness. New Jersey.
That's right.
Another portal.
Yes. Yeah, there's so many portals. I think we also do film quite a bit in the US. We just filmed a bunch of performances for our upcoming video at Art OMI upstate, just very rural. Yeah. So I think we think that going back and forth is also important to our work.
When does your show open at Art OMI?
Oh, so we did an artist residency at Art OMI.
Okay.
But we do have an exhibition coming forward next fall at the Carpenter Center for Visual Arts at Harvard. So that is where the film will be.
Great.
Thank you.
So, and that's in 2026 in the fall.
Yeah.
And what else do you have coming up?
We have an artist residency in the immediate future next month in Iceland. We'll also be filming.
That'll be so great for you.
Talk about amazing places to film.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
The images of Iceland are they all look so magical.
Yeah. So we're super excited for that. We'll be going with our DP. Yeah. Yeah. And then we had made these small Zodiac versions of the ones that we made at Shed for the Bronx Museum last year. It was part of the AIM Biennial. And those are traveling to the Pacific Asia Museum at USC next month as well. Yeah.
That's lots going on. And your new studio that you've done.
Yes. Yeah, we're really excited. We just launched it. So it's been where most of our time has been. But if you're ever interested in a pottery class or a pottery event, we're hosting a birthday event also next week.
And for our listeners, the name of your studio is called?
It's called All About Clay, or ABC is like the preferred acronym.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today. And if you want to know more about AYDO's work, you can visit aydostudio.com or follow them on Instagram, AYDO_studio.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Please take a moment to hit the like button, rate us, and review the show. It makes a big difference in helping us reach more listeners.
Destination.
Your tax-deductible donations make this podcast possible. Please support us at internationalarrivals.org.